Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and it is great to be here at the National Composite Centre. And we've had a tour, we've seen extraordinary technology at work, and I want to congratulate all of the management and staff here for what you're doing. It's a huge, huge tribute to you, a huge, huge tribute to British industry, higher education, and what you can do together. The point of this event is for you to be able to ask me questions. We've got some friends from the media as well who may want to ask me questions too. I just want to say a few words by way of introduction. I want to say something about young people, something about Europe, and something about our health service, all of which I think are really important in this election. Firstly, let me say something about young people, because we were having the discussion earlier on. It seems to me that one of the lessons we learn from what we see here is that we've got to build a proper future for our young people, and it is in our interests, it is in their interests, and it is in businesses' interests too. And, you know, talking to people here about the shortage of skilled engineers, people who have the right training, I think is a really, really interesting lesson for our country. Now, what are we going to do about this? We are going to have a revolution in vocational education. So I think if you're a 14-year-old today, I don't believe you really know what you're aiming at if you're going down the vocational route. We're going to have a gold standard technical baccalaureate so that all 14-year-olds know what they're aiming for, just like a GCSE and A-level track, first of all. Secondly, what we're going to do is we're going to work with business for more high-quality apprenticeships, which I think are essential for the future of our country and the future of our young people. And really there's a rights and responsibilities thing here, saying to our businesses, we'll give you more control over the money that is spent on apprenticeships, but in return, we will say to you, if you get a major government contract, you need to provide apprenticeships to the next generation. I think that's the right thing to do. I think it's the right thing to do for our country. Of course, we will also cut the tuition fee from £9,000 to £6,000 for all young people from autumn 2016. I think that's the right thing to do to invest in our young people, because I don't want our young people living with a huge future burdened down by debt. So firstly, young people. And I think investing in the young is absolutely a key part of what is at issue in this election campaign. Secondly, let me say something about Europe, because we are somewhere today that is serving the businesses of our country. As Tony Blair has said today, it is incredibly important for the future of our country that we remain within the European Union and reform it. And I think this is a fundamental issue for business in this election. You know, so many business people I meet say to me, of course our future lies inside, not outside the European Union. And I think other countries around the world will wonder, you know, what really has come over us when we're debating whether we should leave the European Union, when so much of our businesses, jobs, and livelihoods depend on our future in the European Union. It's got to be a reformed European Union, and it's got to be reformed better to work for business. We want to reform the way it works in terms of immigration, but I believe our future lies inside, not outside the EU. I also want to say something today about the National Health Service, because in a way, businesses need trained young people. You need to have a future in Europe, not outside the European Union. But I believe you also need a workforce who can rely on our NHS. And we've just seen figures today published for waiting times in England's A&E departments, which show that the first 3 months of this year was the worst period since the 4-hour A&E target was introduced over a decade ago. And one of the reasons for that is it's got a lot harder to see a GP, a lot harder to see a GP. Across England, there are some 600 fewer GP surgeries open in the evenings and at weekends than there were at the last general election. 1 in 4 people can't get a GP appointment within a week. The NHS cannot go forward if queues to see your GP are stretching backwards. And I believe that Britain can do a lot better than people waiting day after day for basic healthcare. And that's what our plan will do. So we have a plan in relation to young people, obviously a plan in relation to reforming the European Union. We also have a plan to actually improve our NHS. For 8,000 more doctors, 20,000 more nurses, 5,000 more care workers and 3,000 more midwives, funded not by taxes on ordinary families, not by more borrowing, but by a mansion tax on the most expensive homes above £2 million, by clamping down on tax loopholes by the hedge funds, and by getting money from the tobacco companies. Now, what does this all add up to? A future for young people, Britain staying within the European Union, and a properly invested national health service. I believe it adds up to a vision for the country. And my philosophy is simple, which is I believe it's when working people succeed that the country succeeds. And it's by investing in working people that we will succeed as a nation. And I believe that is what you are doing here. You recognize the importance of training people, giving people the right skills, the skills that they need to succeed and that our country needs for them to succeed too. So that's my opening. I'm now going to take questions initially from the audience we've got here. I will take some media questions at the end. Who would like to begin? And perhaps you can identify yourself. There's a lady here in the third row.
Bonnie Dean from the Bristol and Bath Science Park. My understanding is that there's broad cross-party support for the science budget, which I hope you'll be able to confirm that the Labour Party would continue to invest at least the same level, if not possibly more. But the second part of my question is whether the Labour Party will continue to invest in other parts of the science and innovation ecosystem. So things like Innovate UK, which has been receiving additional funding, R&D tax credits, and many of the other programs that help translate science and research into commercial products and services. Okay, good. I'll come back on that, Bonnie, in a second. Let me take some other questions. Who else would like to come in? There's a gentleman here.
Yes, Merlin Hyman from Regen Southwest. One of the areas we've seen a tremendous development and investment in recent years is in the area of renewable energy and more broadly low carbon technology. I wonder if the Labour Party would commit to getting serious about making the most of the economic opportunities of this. And it relates a little bit to Bonnie's question in terms of the support for business, but thinking in terms of key sectors and how we can really get behind the success of UK business in those key sectors.
Okay, good question, Merlin. Thank you. And there's a lady here, yeah.
Hi, Kate Riddington from the NCC. The Labour Party initiated the Catapult funding to develop UK high-value manufacturing. Obviously, this has been supported throughout the current coalition government. However, funding for this critical activity that turns great ideas into manufacturing reality only receives 10% of the overall science budget. What will the Labour government do to ensure that this is expanded to enable greater pull-through to the UK manufacturing?
Kate, just as somebody who works in this, keep the microphone for a second, what do you think would make the biggest difference? I mean, clearly you would want more investment in catapults, but what do you think would make the biggest difference apart from that?
I think there's a variety of things. One thing for me would be the ease by which we can actually access the funding to support some of the projects that we're doing. That would be a big thing for me.
What would you say a bit more about that?
At the moment, there is quite a rigorous process about getting funding for projects to actually move manufacturing into the UK environment. And it's very hard for small businesses to actually access that money. And I think if the process was simplified, I think you'd find a lot more people actually coming in and putting projects into places like the NCC and other catapults.
Okay, let me deal with all of those questions. Look, first of all, Bonnie, on your question, yes, we do want to see stability in the science budget. I think it's quite important that obviously you want a higher level to the science budget, I understand that, but also that we have a long-term framework for the science budget, because certainty is incredibly important, it seems to me, to know where the funding's coming from and what it's going to be. Just on the point about Innovation UK and the other things that you mentioned, look, we will build on what's working. We're not just going to, upset the apple cart for the sake of it. So if there are things that are working, then we will use them and continue with them. And I was obviously around in government when we had the Technology Strategy Board, which I think has now transitioned. And so we'll look kind of case by case at what's working and how we get that investment in. I think Merlin's question is a really important question, though, which is how do we get serious about renewable energy? Look, one way we don't get serious is by saying that we want to have some kind of moratorium on wind turbines, because I don't think that's going to make people invest. We said we will take the carbon out of our electricity supply by 2030. That's the decarbonisation target. I think that is quite an important framework to encourage the investment we need in renewable energy. I know from my experience as Climate Change Secretary that the Southwest, there's huge opportunities in the Southwest in relation to these issues. So absolutely we want to get serious about it. And what do you need to get serious? You need to have to lead by example. So you need proper targets, binding targets, which you stick to and don't resile from. I think we need to encourage the Green Investment Bank to have proper powers, and I think that will make a big difference. And then, of course, you need to work internationally as well. But I think, in a way, being here makes the point that the investment in early stage technology is also part of the answer. Because unless you get that investment in early stage technology, then you can't then roll it out. And in a way, your question is really important because it's, some people will portray this as a choice between the environment and the economy, and the truth is it isn't. The two go together. If we're going to succeed in the economy of the future, we actually need to take care of our environment because there is a huge opportunity in terms of green jobs. On Kate's question, let me look at that. Let me take that away and look at that issue, both about the way the budget is spent and about the access that that there is to grants for small businesses and others, because that sounds like an important issue. Let's take another round of questions. Yeah, gentleman in the front.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark Thomas from GK Aerospace, and I also am the Unite executive. Reference zero-hour contracts. Labour's position has been very clear that they'll legislate against zero-hour contracts, but in the last week or so, I've been reading there's going to be almost like a 12-week sort of qualification period. Can you explain to me why that needs to be the case?
Okay, thanks, Mark. Good question. Who else wants to come in? Yep.
Question from Mark Williams, Independent Living Fund recipient. In view of the fact that disabled people in the devolved nations are to continue to have an independent living fund, why is the Labour Party still not committing to keeping this vital fund open for disabled people in England and reopening it to new applicants? How can Labour justify seeing disabled people in England faring less well than our neighbours?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. Let me take one more. There's a gentleman at the back, right in the middle.
This building is here partly from the efforts of the
What's your name, sorry?
Sorry, Steve Bendel.
Hi, Steve.
This building is partly here from the efforts of the Regional Development Agency. The coalition government abolished regional development agencies. Does the Labour government think, will the Labour government think that we should have both an industrial policy and a regional policy?
Steve, what do you do?
I work in housing.
I mean, let me answer you directly, and then I'll come to the other two questions. Look, on the question of the Regional Development Agency, we could have made a decision to go back to the old order of things. I don't think it was a very sensible decision to abolish the RDAs, but I think that maybe it goes to the question that Bonnie was asking earlier. You know, in a way, the temptation for governments or new governments to just overturn everything is also a recipe for delay and actually more disruption. So what we've said is let's build on the local enterprise partnerships. But absolutely, you need a regional strategy. And look, what I think is very exciting is our plan to work with the LEPs and to work with city and county regions to devolve power in this country. Because look, we are too centralised a country. Devolution was right for Scotland and Wales, and it is right for England as well. And we need to devolve power over the things that matter to local people, whether it's transport or skills or economic development or building a future for young people. Now, I think we can do that at a sub-regional level through city and county regions, but it's got to be not piecemeal, not picking and choosing one part of the country and another, which is what this government is doing. It's got to be comprehensive. It's got to be real in terms of the power that is devolved. It's got to be meaningful. So, for example, we're saying that businesses will get to keep 100% of the uplift in terms of business rates. So, I think that is that's the way to actually build on what's there, but go far further. Because the complaint I get, and I'm sure there are people here who do great work in local enterprise partnerships, the complaint I get from people is people saying, look, the problem is we don't feel we have much muscle in the LEP. We feel that we are, we are slightly hamstrung by not having enough bite to what we are doing. So that is my answer to you. On the ILF question, it is an important question. Look, the fund will have already been devolved more or less by the time the election takes place. But look, we are committed to absolutely doing everything we can to protect existing claimants at the very least, and then to look at what we need to do in terms of new claimants. And it is going to be devolved to local authorities, but what we've said is we'll work with local authorities to make sure we do everything we can to protect existing claimants, because I know how important the ILF is to people. On Mark's question on 0 hours contracts, the point about this policy, Mark, is to establish over 12 weeks how many hours people are working, and then make sure they get a contract of regular hours. We've talked to lots of people in industry and indeed in the trade unions, what's the best way to stop the system being gamed by employers? And what we didn't want was 0 hours contracts to go and 1 hour contracts to replace them. And we think this is the best way to say, over 12 weeks, we'll establish how many hours you're working, and just like you do in other employment legislation, and then we will establish what your contract should be. So if you work regular hours, you get a regular contract, and 92% of people on 0 hours contracts are on more than 12 weeks. So we're talking about the vast, vast majority of people. And I think this is the right way forward for the new system. But it is a big contrast between ourselves and our opponents. David Cameron wants to allow people month after month, year after year, to be on a 0 hours contract. We're going to stop it, and we're going to legislate for it. Let me get some. I'll come to the media in a second. Yeah.
Sachin from NCC.
Hi.
I appreciate the government's initiative in funding various high-value manufacturing catapult centers. At some point, surely we will have to be independent, self-sufficient. What is the Labour view on this?
What do you do here, Sachin?
I am a technology project lead.
Oh, tell us about your technology and what you're doing.
It's ever-growing. It is revolutionizing in various new sectors whereby it gives new employment.
If you explain to us what you were doing, do you think we would understand, or is it far too complicated for us to understand, do you think? What kind of area do you work in?
I work in project management.
What kind of projects are you managing?
Various different kinds, really, in various fields.
Now I know what it's like. Now I know what it's like when I answer questions.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Good. Give us one. Go on, give us one project.
AC Marine.
What does that do?
They build tidal turbines.
Excellent. Okay, I'll also try and answer your question. Who else wants to come in? Yeah, there's a gentleman here, and then we'll take a gentleman in the third row.
Just picking up on the sustainability.
What's your name, sorry?
Steve Mason from GE Aviation. Just picking up on the sustainability long-term funding for both catapult centres and technology development, but also your thoughts on how to attract the inward investment, because obviously GE is a multinational company. So your thoughts on inward investment to attract companies like GE to do their technology development here in the UK, not elsewhere in the world.
Well, as somebody who's wrestling with these issues, Steve, what's your thought on this? Well, you're fighting within GE for inward investment to here, presumably.
Absolutely, and we're always fighting with the low-cost economies like China and the Far East will also fund technology technology development to a large degree as well. So there's always tensions.
And what do you when you're selling Britain? Obviously you're selling the fact that you're doing a great job and all that. But what else are you selling about Britain?
I'm selling this. Basically, we've got a great university base with Seacorn Technologies. We have places like the NCC and the other catapult centres that effectively transition those technologies into usable product. And I'm selling the R&D tax credits, the funding through Innovate, and actually, to be fair, EU funding as well.
I mean, I was going to ask you, without putting you in a difficult position, I mean, presumably, your bosses would think Britain within the EU is better than Britain outside the EU.
I can't...
Couldn't possibly comment. Very sensible, very sensible. I think we should give that man a promotion in GE. Yeah.
Hello, Giles Simmons, NCC.
Yeah.
Turnout for the last general election was the third lowest since 1945, with a marked decline in younger voters of 18 to 25-year-olds. What do you see as the primary causes for this, and how would you drive higher engagement with the electorate, in particular younger voters?
I mean, good place to start. Look, the point of events like this, the point of the people's question times that we do around the country is to engage directly with people about what is on the ballot paper at this election. I think this election choice, now that you've asked, is quite a simple idea, which is, I think the Conservative view is, look, if we take care of those at the top, the wealth will trickle down to everybody else. I don't feel that is a sustainable or successful way of running a country. I believe you've got to invest in working people. And that goes to the question we talked about earlier about 0 hours contracts and rewarding hard work. It's about a higher minimum wage. It's about investing in our young people and getting the skills that they need, because that's incredibly important to the future of our country. It's about investing in small and medium-sized businesses and making a difference to them. And it is about a proper industrial policy. So I think the way to engage young people, and indeed everybody in this election, is to show the difference it will make to them. And whether it's on tuition fees and apprenticeships, or on housing, or on jobs for young people, I'm proud of the offer that we are putting forward. But I suppose the other thing to say on this is that engage young people at the sites that they use, not just in the places that mainstream politicians use as well. So engage them in different ways on Facebook and elsewhere. We'd also give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds. Now, that might be unfashionable with some people, but I think it's the right thing to do, because I think we need to engage young people in our democracy, and I think the best place to start is early. Believe it or not, I'm going to surprise some people here. I was doing an interview with Joey Essex the other day, and one of the things he was saying to me was, look, the part of the problem is being, education in schools. I was talking about this issue of 16 and 17-year-olds. You've got to start in the schools, because if you don't start in the schools, then actually I don't think our young people are going to be engaged in our democracy. But in the end, the responsibility lies on politicians, which is to say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep our promise to do it, and we're laying out our stall. So I think that is the best. I think that's the best sort of way forward. Steve, on your point, I think lots of the things you mention are important. I think, what do we know in a world of where companies are mobile? It's your people that are your biggest asset. There's no question about it. That's why this issue of investment in skills is absolutely crucial, because unless you have the skilled workforce, and I remember this from my time as climate change secretary, one of the things that some of the wind turbine manufacturers would say is we can't get the skilled people. We just can't get the skilled people in Britain. So make sure that we have the skilled young people. Make sure that we have a proper industrial policy, and don't treat it as a dirty word, having an industrial policy. And I think that is an important change that we made in government, and to an extent the government has, some areas has carried it on, some areas it hasn't. Recognising that public and private work better together. So look, we're going to protect education spending, investment in education. Our opponents, the Conservatives, are not. I think it's a totally false economy to cut education spending, because it means how can you then plan for the future? And then, I wouldn't expect you to comment, but I think also our place in the world, because I think we've got a market of 500 million people in Europe, and I think we're better off in it rather than out of it. Sachin, on your question about self-sufficiency, look, I sort of understand the point you're making on this, but I don't think we should worry about the idea that you have government providing some support for the private sector. Look, it's interesting, we got into a position in Britain in the after the 1970s of what was called picking winners. You're too young to remember the 1970s, but so am I actually. But so we got into the thing of picking winners, right? And that was really, that didn't work, right? But then it got us into a mindset that we couldn't even have an industrial policy. And it goes back to the question I was asked about green technology. You need an industrial policy which says, look, there are certain sectors that are going to be successful sectors for the future, and you've got to be willing to invest in them. So how much, whether you go independent or not, I think is in a way going to end up being a decision for you. But I think the bigger point about government working with industry on some of these key things, particularly where there are market failures, when it's new technology and so on, I think it can make a real and positive difference. I think I saw a gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Hi, Chris Payne from the NCC. Carrying on from what you were just saying about industrial policy, given that Germany has demonstrated that we can make an industrial economy work in Europe, why is it not on the agenda within this election?
Good question. Yep, and there's a gentleman. Oh, lots of people now. Yep, there's a lady here.
Hi, Laura Pickard from the NCC.
What do you do here, Laura?
I'm a research engineer, and I'm studying on the engineering doctorate in composites manufacture.
So you're doing a PhD?
NGD, close enough.
NGD, sorry. Yeah. What's yours in?
I'm looking at improving the manufacturing process, make it more energy efficient and increase our understanding of what happens during the manufacture.
Great. Okay, sorry, your question, sorry.
I have a more generic question
Yeah.
for you. If you were to become Prime Minister, you would face difficult decisions, choices between bad and worse. Some of us are going to feel that way on polling day, I'm sure. I want to understand, how do you make those choices? And specifically, when you're faced with a tough decision, at what point does an individual's right to choose become secondary to the general good? And how will you decide what the general good is?
My goodness. I'm really glad I called you. Are you thinking of just on the last part of your question, are you thinking of a specific situation or a specific issue?
No, I can
Okay.
think of a number of examples.
Okay, okay. I'll try. It feels like being back at university. Right, okay. There's a lady in the centre.
Hi Ed, my name's Rosie Salbert and I'm a GCSE Year 11 student. I'm wondering what you think can be done about the pressure on young people in schools and about mental health in young people.
Is this a big issue at your school?
I think so, yeah, and it's an issue for me.
Let me start with that question because I think it is really, really important. Look, there's a lot more we need to do in mental health. And mental health, the way I see it, mental health is a poor cousin of physical health in the way we treat it. And child and adolescent mental health is a poor cousin of mental health generally. And so we've made a commitment to increase the level of investment in child and adolescent mental health because we think it's important for the future of our young people. And it's a false economy, isn't it? Because if you don't invest in child and adolescent mental health, you end up with young people's mental health problems getting worse. They end up in hospital. It costs you thousands of pounds, like lots of issues in the health service. And so prevention is an incredibly important part of what we need to do, and we are committed to doing that. I think, though, you raise an important issue, which is, you know, there's never been a greater time to be a young person in terms of the level of opportunity, but there's never been a more pressured time to be a young person in terms of all of the different pressures that there are. Pressures to succeed, pressures from the internet, you know, all peer pressure, all kinds of things. Now, those things have always existed, but my sense is they've been turbocharged by the kind of era in which we live. And I think part of it is thinking that schools are not just places where you're supposed to pass exams. There's more to school than being an exam factory. Schools are also about, you know, actually helping young people prepare for the challenges of life. Just a small thing, we said that teachers should have mental health training so that they can look to help young people who feel the need for help. So that would be my answer to you. Laura, your question. Look, in the end, you've got to go. The thing I've learned most of all in this job is you've got to go on your instincts and what your guts tell you about the different choices that you face. And what's that based on? It's based on my principles about the kind of country I'd want to run. And look, there are going to always be difficult decisions, but I think it's what's your starting point. My starting point is that there are lots and lots of people in this country who are denied opportunity, who do all the right things, go out to work, put in the hours, don't get properly rewarded. Lots of young people who are desperate for opportunity and don't get it. And I happen to believe that politics can make a difference to that. And I think if you base the idea on not how can I help those people who have the access, those people who already have the influence, those people who already are doing well for themselves, but how do we actually help working people who feel they don't get a look in, then we'll be all better off as a result. Because this idea that when working people succeed, Britain succeeds, is not just how do you judge the success of a country, it's that we are better off when we succeed together. That each of us actually benefits from the success of all of us. That is my basic view about the way a country succeeds. As for the last part of your question, look, you always have to weigh up the interests of particular individuals and the interests of the country as a whole, and you try and make the best of that of that choice that you face. I mean, the one other thing I'd say is it's easy to stand up to the weak. It's much harder to stand up to the strong. So, look, when I've been leader of the opposition, I've stood up to Rupert Murdoch, I've stood up to the energy companies, I've stood up to the banks. That isn't easy. It's much easier to stand up to people and make them pay the bedroom tax, which is what my opponent has done. And that's, in a way, a judgment you've got to make about the character of the person and who you want to be Prime Minister. On the question that Chris asked, look, I am an enthusiast for industrial policy, as I hope I've demonstrated. I think it's incredibly important to the future of our country. I think it is about public and private working together. I think the one other thing, though, I'd say, what have we learnt about industrial policy? You've got to have an industrial policy from the centre. You've got to have banks that properly work. I haven't talked today about the British Investment Bank, which is about powering forward our small and medium-sized enterprises, which I think is incredibly important to the future of the country. I still think that the banking system, maybe we've dealt with, I hope we've dealt with too big to fail, but we haven't dealt with the issue of competition in our banking industry, how it serves business. I mean, that is, if you think about Germany and the difference with Germany, so one of the biggest differences, we haven't dealt with an apprenticeship system, decades-long problem, hasn't properly been dealt with. Infrastructure, again, it's another thing that needs to be properly dealt with, and we're going to have an independent commission on infrastructure to actually force government to make decisions on infrastructure. So I think we can have a successful industrial policy. It's not exactly emulating Germany, because I don't think you can kind of transplant one country into another, but I think it is about learning some of the lessons. Now, I'm being told to wind up, and I'm going to ignore them for the moment, which is what I tend to do. There's a gentleman here. There's two people along the row.
Hello, I'm Bill Free from Carillion. I do remember the 1970s. It's a sort of point that
you don't look
raised.
old enough, Bill.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll vote for you.
Thank you very much. That was what I intended. So,
I mean,
we'll call it quits there. No, I'm joking. Carry on.
I went to school in the 70s, and it was a sort of time when things were changing. We did a lot of practical work, and sort of coursework was starting to come into how we were judged. And it was quite inspirational for me, and I went on to become an engineer as a result of this. And I really worry that, I mean, there's an awful lot happening for vocational skills development. You've talked about that. But actually there's people who will go through the sort of GCSEs and A-levels, and this seems to be turned back into a very sort of Victorian way of learning with all about exams and cramming, and taking away the inspiration that sort of practical people will take from it and go into engineering type jobs.
Rosie was nodding. Rosie, who asked the question earlier, was nodding and agreeing with you. I think the gentleman on the end, and I'm going to take then the lady here. Yeah.
Hi, Giuseppe Di Nano, NCC. As you might gather from my very thick Italian accent, I'm Italian. I'm an Italian engineer who moved to the UK 12 years ago as a fresh graduate. I've grown professionally and personally in this country, and I was given plenty of opportunities here to get where I am at the moment. What is your view? I know for a fact that there are plenty of people like me eager to move around Europe and to come to the UK, to any other country in Europe. What's your view on the immigration side of things, especially specifically to skilled people like I was back then?
Okay, thanks, Giuseppe. And then there's a lady here. Yeah.
Hi, Ed. I'm Leah. I work at the National Composite Centre.
What do you do here, Leah?
I'm a graduate research engineer, so I work in the HVM area with our brand new press. I hope you're impressed with it.
I was very impressed by it.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to voting in the general election for the second time, and I received my poll card on Friday. There was a spelling mistake in it. Do you think that that's acceptable, seeing as these are being distributed to everybody across Bristol, possibly the country?
They spelled your name wrong, did they?
Not my name, but it said it is an offence to vote more that once rather than more than once.
Which is your local council then?
Bristol East, I think it is.
So it might be the mayor of Bristol who has to take responsibility. That may be unfair. Right. No, it's not acceptable. We should go tell somebody off about that. And spelling will be better under a Labour government. I can promise you that. Giuseppe, look, your question is really important. So there'll be some people who say in this election that we should get out of the European Union. Nigel Farage, for example, says we should get out of the European Union. And look, I think that'll be the wrong thing to do for our country. I do think there need to be controls on immigration, but I think we've got to embrace people like you who can make this contribution. I think there's two things that we've got to do in particular, though. One, we've got to make sure that when people come here, the right to move around is not simply the right to claim benefits. So we'll say people have to wait at least 2 years to claim, and I think probably people in Italy would agree with that too. I think that's a sort of, I think actually in Europe there'll be quite a lot of support for that idea. And secondly, we've got to make sure, you're obviously a highly skilled person making a big contribution to the country, we've got to make sure that when it comes to low-skilled migration, I suppose two other things. One, that we don't end up exploiting migrant labor and undercutting wages. So I think one of the reasons people are concerned about immigration is they think, well, actually people are being brought here, paid less than the minimum wage, it's undercutting wages of people already here. I don't think that's true in your case, but I think you've got to make sure that minimum standards are properly enforced. It goes back to the point earlier about 0 hours contracts, for example. And secondly, and this is the interesting thing about this discussion, we treat these two issues about our openness as a country and who the country works for as separate issues. They're not separate issues, they're joined issues. Because the best way of being a confident, outward-looking country is having the high-quality apprenticeships, having the high-quality skills for our young people here as well. And I'm sure that's something you would agree with. So let's also train workers here to have the opportunities. Let's train our young people to have the opportunities. Let's not shut our borders. It's not the right thing to do for the country. But let's also train people here, because I think that is the way to remain confident. But to sum it up, look, I'm for being outward-looking and remaining in the European Union. I think not just economically, by the way, but strategically as well. Think about terrorism, think about climate change, think about our place in the world, think about GE. We're much better off staying in. Now, I think I should owe my media friends a question. Lucy first. Welcome back, Lucy.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Happy Passover.
Lucy Manning, BBC News. Tony Blair's been out campaigning today, but not with you. Is that because you don't want to share a platform with him, or he doesn't want to share a platform with you?
It's simple. He can speak for himself, and I think he's speaking for himself very well today in what he's saying. Because what he's warning about is that Britain's place in the European Union is of benefit to our country, that the EU needs to change, but it will be a disaster for our country to leave the European Union. And I think it's quite important that we've got a former Prime Minister saying about the current Prime Minister that what he's doing is dangerous. What he's doing is dangerous for the country, because he is making Britain drift towards the exit door. Not because he believes in Britain going towards the exit door, as Tony points out in his speech. That's the great irony of David Cameron's position. He claims to believe that he wants us to stay in, but he is allowing his party to drift us towards the exit door. And there's a big question of priorities at this election. I'm just going to be absolutely straight with you about this. My priority is not to spend 2 years after the general election debating Britain exiting the European Union. My priority is to sort out the cost of living crisis, rescue the NHS, and build a future for our young people. And I actually think they're the priorities of the British people as well. So I think it's an important intervention that Tony is making, and I think he's right. I'm going to take Carl.
Hi, Carl Dinn, 19 News. The Conservatives have repeated their claim today that in order to fix the deficit, Labour would have to tax working families £3,028 over the next Parliament. However you think they may have arrived at those figures, they'll keep repeating them until you've explained exactly how you would fix that £30 billion hole. Would you like to give us the figures?
Well, the Tory figures are wrong, wrong and wrong. They're wrong at every level. And the figures they're basing it on are made up. And look, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, respected independent organisation, have themselves criticised those figures. Now, the Conservatives can keep saying it. All it shows is they've got nothing to say about the future of our country. Look, we're actually talking about how we're going to change the future of our country on the NHS, on industrial policy, on skills for young people. I think it is the most negative, poor and pathetic campaign being run by the Conservative Party. And I've got to say to you, I think that actually the people of the country deserve better than what they're offering. I'm going to take Jason.
I'm going to push you on Lucy's question. First of all, Tony Blair says he supports you 100%. Are you 100% happy to receive it?
Yes.
You are appearing on stage 200 miles apart. Does that emphasise the distance between you? And have you ever taken advice from Tony Blair, specifically on how to win an election?
I've talked to Tony Blair and all our leaders quite often over the past 4.5 years. And you know what's interesting about what Tony Blair would say, and I think what other leaders would say, and the single most important lesson that I've learned in this job is you have to be who you are. And that's what I'm doing in this election campaign. And that's why I'm enjoying this election campaign. Because I've got a chance to say who I am and what I stand for. And my friend's question earlier on, the sort of philosophy tutorial question, which is a good, important question about the election, gives me the chance to do that. And I think what Tony's doing today is important. It's an important intervention. And I think it will, by the way, speak to voters, not just Labour voters, but voters right across the political spectrum who will think this is somebody who is making an intervention in an election campaign and pointing out what he believes a Conservative Prime Minister is doing in terms of the danger it poses to our country and the risks it proposes to the prosperity of our country. Anyone else? I think I'll take you, sir. You get the final word.
Hello there.
What's your name?
I'm Mike Hinton. I'm from the NCC.
Hi, Mike. What do you do here?
I'm Technology Director. The question I've got for you really is around the £6,000 student's fee.
Yeah.
I come from a family that didn't have anything.
Yeah.
And I did quite well in a system where it was free. I'd like to encourage you and just push you a little bit on maybe your policy towards moving towards free education at universities, because actually the cost to the nation is not much, because we're not recovering the money through the grant system. It's busted. So I'd just like to push you a little bit on that policy and where it might head to.
Shall I announce it now?
Yeah, do it.
Look, here's the thing. You're right to ask the question. I said in the debate on Thursday night that I didn't get charged tuition fees, nor did David Cameron, nor did Nick Clegg. I think this is one of those things, and it does go back to some of the questions that I've been asked. I think Laura's question, I'm not picking on you, Laura, but it goes back to your question. It goes back to Laura's question and the question that was asked about young people and how we get young people engaged in politics. Look, the view I've taken at this election is there's two ways you can run an election campaign as leader of the opposition. You can, or indeed as an opposition politician, you can say, I'm going to make all kinds of promises to people, and let's see whether I can keep them in government, and I hope people don't catch up with me in government when I break those promises. Not to be rude, it's sort of Nick Clegg's school of political leadership. Now look, I've taken the personal view that that's not a very good way of making people trust either me or politics. So why have we announced the £6,000? Because I believe the £6,000 is what we can achieve. And it's what we can achieve, and it's what we're going to achieve, and I think it's the right thing. If we could go further, we would. I've said in the past, we're interested in the idea of a graduate tax, but the policy for this election is the £6,000. I think it will make a difference to young people. Just want to say one other thing, which is, before Joe comes in and says a few words. So I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank the NCC for the great job it is doing. Look, I think this is a lesson for the future, because this is about public and private working together and the difference public and private can make working together. And I think actually with that partnership approach, there's nothing that can stop us, because I think we're a great country. We've got fantastically skilled people. I think, I know here in the Southwest, you've got incredible skills and talents, great universities, great people, and so we can achieve great things if we do them together. Thank you all for being here.